Why is the more you socialize, the more exhausted you feel? Only when you clear out 3 types of people from your life, your good luck really start to arrive. Today, let's talk about some of my views on relationships. First, with this they clean up, then cherish fiercely. First 3 relationships like a balance sheet, then turn solitude into a form of high-level freedom. Monroe's view on relationships can be seen as a summary review of his lifelong social philosophy. First, ruthless printing, then deep appreciation. First see relationships as a balance sheet, then live solitaire as a higher freedom. Monroe's claim freak approach to people. Learn to cut ties coldly. First, in Monroe's view, the core reason he has lived long, stayed happy, and had fewer worries is not mainly because his investments was successful, but because he has an almost clean freak level of discipline and coldness in how he handles relationships. He openly admits that over his lifetime, he has spent more time on judging people and choosing people than on reading financial statements. Once he decides someone is not worth dealing with, no matter how rich, powerful, or talented the person is, he cuts them out of his life completely. No doing business together, no meals together, not even appearing in the same room. To outsiders, this may sound almost cruel, but in Monroe's logic, this is simply respecting his own time and energy. Time and energy are a person's most expensive assets and must be guarded the way you guard your wealth. Social assets vs. social liabilities. Most people's social life is a mess on the books. Money directly compares relationships to a social balance sheet. Social assets are the people who bring you energy, wisdom, or peace. When you're with them, your thinking becomes clearer, your emotions more stable. When life feels like it's doing addition, some sure liabilities are the people who train you, make you doubt yourself, or drag you down. Being around them leaves you tired, anxious, and angry. Your life isn't just doing subtraction sometimes, it's doing division, being quaffed into smaller and smaller pieces. In his view, the biggest mistake most people make is this: they are clearly carrying a huge pile of social liabilities, yet don't dare to claim them out for the sake of saving face, fitting in, or being part of the group. They would rather keep smiling along and attending pointless dinners than simply say no. Monroe's conclusion is very calm. Cutting ties is not an act of harm, but a form of self-protection, a sign of maturity. He especially emphasizes the math of opportunity cost. If you give one art to a lousy person, you lose that art that could have been spent with good people, learning, or reading. Every time you say yes to a bad relationship, you are essentially signing not better possibilities. The first type of person you must stay away from: the self-pitying victim. Monroe's experience. Self-pity is one of the worst mental poisons a human being can take in. In his eyes, victim-type people have a few obvious traits. They blame everyone else for their problems. If work isn't going well, it's because the boss is stupid or colleagues are excluding them. If an investment fails, they blame a rigged market. If life feels unhappy, they blame incompetent parents or an unloving partner. They look pitiful and easily trigger your sympathy, but they don't actually want to solve their problems. What they really want is an audience and sometimes even a companion in the grave to go down with them. They keep chewing on the details of their suffering over and over again, dragging others into a muddy emotional period of resentment and complaint. Monroe recalls that back in the 1950s he knew a friend who was extremely intelligent and eloquent, but had one fatal habit. He attributed everything to bad luck. Every time they met, this friend would complain non-stop for half an hour, from his career, to his rent, all the way to the weather. At first, Monroe tried to comfort him and offer advice, but he soon realized that people like this don't actually want solutions. What they want is a justification that lets them fail with a clear conscience. Through complaining, they gain a twisted kind of satisfaction. They prove to themselves how miserable they are, and at the same time win an excuse not to work hard or change. Decades later, Mona watched people around him who had started from a lower base than that friend, and who were of only average talent, build prosperous lives through optimism and resilience. Meanwhile, that friend, even in his 70s, was still complaining. His life had been quietly consumed by self-pity. That's why Among Us says, when a person locks himself into the role of victim, he hands over the control of his life to the outside world and lets circumstances toss him around. This logic also explains why, in the face of major blows in his own life, the Great Depression, going broke when he was young, divorce, raising children alone, and the death of his eldest son from leukemia, Mona still refused to sink into self-pity. For him, grief is real, but self-pity solves nothing and doesn't pay the bills. The path he chose was acknowledge reality, wipe away the tears, and keep moving forward. In his own summary, this anti-victim toughness is one of the key reasons he was able to come back, become wealthy, and live a long life. So his first piece of advice can be summed up like this. Monet not only refuses to allow himself to indulge in self-pity, he also refuses to tolerate people who live in long-term self-pity. That is his first line of defense for protecting his own energy. The second type of people you must avoid: smart people with moral flaws. In Nana's relationship checklist, intelligent people with cracks in their character are even more dangerous than victims. The reason is, the incompetence of chronic complainers is obvious at a glance. But when someone is highly talented, eloquent, with a dazzling resume, when their character is questionable, their destructive power gets magnified tenfold, 100-fold. Mona repeatedly emphasizes, talent is the engine, character is the steering wheel. The stronger the engine, if the steering wheel is crooked, the faster the car will crash and burn. He has seen too many brilliant jerks, people on Wall Street designing complex financial derivatives, packaging garbage as gold and selling it to clients, exploiting loopholes in rules to reap heat profits. Burning through trust created a short-term illusion of winners. But without exception, they all eventually head toward ruin, dragging down the people who trusted them. He has a famous hiring principle. As soon as he sees even a tiny crack in someone's morals, in someone extremely talented, he walks away immediately. He would rather choose someone of average ability, who is upright and reliable, than a genius whose talent is astonishing, but whose character is ambiguous. Once, he encountered a fund manager who was exceptionally capable and had made the company a lot of money. But this person would fudge small items on expense reports, taking little advantages from the firm. Others tried to persuade him, if the water is too clear, there will be no fish. It's just a bit of money, no big deal. Mona's judgment, however, once, if someone is willing to lie over tens of dollars on an expense claim, sooner or later they will also lie over hundreds of millions in a deal. In his eyes, this is a question of probability and of the consistency of character. You cannot expect a person to be dishonest in small matters, yet suddenly become a saint in big ones. By contrast, his partnership with Buffett is built almost entirely on a structure of seamless trust. Sometimes a single phone call is enough to close a deal, without repeatedly polishing the contract, because they know the other side will not stop them in the bug. This high level of trust drastically reduces transaction costs, allowing Bush to manage an enormous asset base with a very small headquarters staff. Therefore, his second iron rule is, when it comes to smart people with moral flaws, have zero tolerance. Do not fantasize about changing them, and do not dream of using their talent. Once you see the first signs, get away immediately, as if you are avoiding radioactive poison. The third type of people you must avoid: cognitively closed pretend sleepers. In Mona SB, the most terrifying kind of death is not when the heart stops beating, but when the brain stops learning. He says that some people are effectively dead by the time they're around 30. They just don't get buried until they're 70 or 80. These people share a few traits. At a certain age they form a fixed worldview, then shut down their minds. no longer taking in new information and refusing to revise old beliefs. They only have one hammer in their hands, so every problem they see is treated as a nail. They habitually reject anything new and instinctively rage at different opinions, mistaking stubbornness for having principles and ignorance for tradition. Monroe has a name for this mindset: psychological denial. In order to protect their fragile self-esteem, they would rather distort facts, attack the truth, and even make up lies than admit, "I was wrong." He once gave an example. When the internet first began to rise, he advised an old friend to learn about this new thing. The friend just sneered, treating it as a toy for children, a short-lived bubble, even when the internet had profoundly transformed business and society. This friend had still refused to use email, refused to learn anything online, and clung to his old business tricks. As a result, his business shrank year after year and eventually went bankrupt. He became withdrawn and bilious, convinced that the times had abandoned him. But in Mona's eyes, the truth was exactly the opposite. It was that man who abandoned the times first. Therefore, his strategy with this type of person is, don't argue, just stay away. He believes that trying to wake someone who is only pretending to sleep is to coarsely and use no return. Use logic. He uses emotion. You show him a new world, and he only feels offended. Even worse, Mona has always believed emotions are contagious, and stupidity is contagious. To keep the surface peace, if you stay too long around people whose minds are closed, you will very easily and unconsciously lower your own cognitive standards, and eventually lose your curiosity and capacity for self-evolution. For someone who wants to succeed, that is almost the same as receiving a death sentence. After the cleanup, rebuilding a minimal but powerful social system, in Mona's blueprint, once a person has cleared the complainers, the unethical, and the pretend sleepers, their contact list may shrink by half, their social dinners may drop by 90%, and life may look quiet on the surface. But in his eyes, this is precisely the starting point for rebuilding a high-quality relationship system. Many people are curious how he came to know top figures like Buffett and Bill Gates, and assume there must be some advanced networking tricks behind it. But the answer Mona gives is very simple. If you want to obtain something good, you must first make yourself worthy of it. In his view, relationships follow a kind of law of like attracts like. People full of negative energy and victimhood only attract other victims. Those who love to speculate and play little tricks will inevitably gather more speculators and swindlers around them. If you want to meet people who are honest, intelligent, and generous, you must first grow in those directions yourself. Therefore, he believes the first step in cleaning up your social circle is actually cleaning up yourself. Print yourself until you are clean and sharp. Focus on improving your character and capabilities, and excellent people will naturally be drawn to you. The seamless web of trust between him and Buffett is the best example of this idea. In such a system, there is no need for heavy defenses and constant games, nor for complex contracts to restrain each other. Each handles the other's money as if it were their own. Trust itself becomes the most efficient form of leverage. When rebuilding your circle, Mona advocates being extremely lean and extremely selective. You don't need 100 superficial acquaintances. You only need 3 to 5 friends you would stake your life on. These 3 to 5 people must be optimistic, upright, and open. When you fall, they reach out to pull you up instead of just sign alongside you. When you face moral temptation, they stop you instead of egging you on. When you make mistakes, they criticize you directly instead of pretending to be asleep. It's hard to find such people. You might only meet one in 10 years, but he believes a truly high-quality partner is worth investing in for a lifetime. In his eyes, real connections are not the business cards exchanged at cocktail parties, nor the laughs traded in group chats, but the people who were still willing to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you when you have nothing at all. Solitude is not a failure, but a higher form of freedom. Money also openly admits when a person has gone through several rounds of brutal cutting off and only maintains contact with a small number of truly trustworthy people, he will indeed find that life becomes more lonely. The fun no longer reigns all day long. Weekends are no longer filled with boring social gatherings. Sometimes when you want to talk to someone, you realize there are very few people you can actually call. But in his value system, this kind of solitude is not a sign of failure, but a medal, the price you must pay for pursuing excellence and freedom. Because once a person is no longer drained by messy, pointless relationships, he suddenly gains a huge amount of time that truly belongs to himself, which he can use for reading, to have conversations with great minds across history, use for thinking, to clarify the nature of business and the meaning of life, use for being with family, to enjoy genuine family happiness. Mana himself spent most of his life in his study. He did not need to rely on socializing to gain a sense of existence, because he knew very clearly who he was and what he was doing. When a person has a strong enough inner core, he no longer needs to constantly seek validation from the outside. The happiness he experienced came more from inner peace than from noisy scenes. And his standard for measuring success was not how many people you know, but how many people are truly worth knowing. His ultimate advice: be a clean freak about relationships. Taken as a whole, the final version of what Mana wants to convey here can be summed up roughly as: the quality of your life depends largely on whether you can say no to the wrong people, clearing the complainers, the unethical, and those who pretend to be asleep is the precondition for protecting your energy, guarding your character, and cherishing your time. Only after you finish this clearing can the space that remains be filled with wisdom, wealth, and genuine friendship. The highest state of life is to have a clear mind, upright character, and a few friends you can truly rely on, plus a way of living where you are willing to be alone and can genuinely enjoy solitude. From a third-person perspective, we can understand his message to young people like this. Mana is not teaching people how to make more friends. He is teaching them: first learn to delete people recklessly, then spend the rest of your life carefully honoring the few who are truly worth keeping, rather than slowly rotting in a pile of rotten relationships. It is better to walk alone in a clean and free life, and then leave the rest to time and compound.